Welcome to Conversations with Iris, the podcast series on migration, displacement and mobility produced by the Institute of Research into Superdiversity at the University of Birmingham. I am Anna Papoutsi. I am a postdoctoral fellow at IRIS and I am working on border temporalities. Today, I'm delighted to have with me Inka Stock to discuss her book, Time, Migration and Forced Immobility, Sub-Saharan African Migrants in Morocco. Here it is. Inka is a sociologist. She's currently with the University of Bielefeld, and her work focuses on inequalities and migration with a special interest in African migrations. The book is published by Bristol University Press, and it's part of the Global Migration and Social Change series. It won an honorary mention in the annual Best Book Award 2020 by the BISA, the British International Studies Association, and in particular, the International Politics of Migration, Refugees, and Diaspora Working Group. Hi, Inka. Thanks for being here with us. So maybe you can briefly tell us, what the book is about, its importance, its implications, especially because it's quite, it deals a lot with policy and its implications.
The book is about, I think in general, the book is about what happens to, if migration policy is successful in inhibiting people to move, what then happens to them and their lives? This is actually the central question that I was interested in. So what happens if people are immobilized against their will? So, and I try to answer that question by looking at the specific situations of Sub-Saharan African migrants that are stuck in Morocco, who did not intentionally wanted to end up in Morocco, but who then were stuck there because of quite successful migration controls that inhibited them from moving onwards towards other countries. So that is what the book is about. Yeah,
exactly. And it has a lot to do with EU externalization policies, right? It's not just Morocco. What I really find interesting in the book, and quite helpful also for my research, was the critical examination of concepts like transit, in transit, transiting people, transit countries. And you discuss this in your book really extensively. You discuss how these are situations or conditions that are produced by specific policies and specific funding streams, and they have also specific implications. In contrast, the experience of the migrants that you studied, or that were your participants, is that of a forced immobility. So, and I like that you use this as an analytical tool to understand this condition. So I think can you talk about this, especially given that the context in these transit countries like Morocco and Turkey is constantly changing, and people get now residency permits and they can work. So with these changing conditions on the ground, is this concept still useful politically and analytically?
Right. When I started, this book grew out of a PhD research, actually. And before even doing my PhD, I had been working and living in Morocco for a long, long time, since the end of the 90s, actually. And the whole idea of the PhD and the research and the book came out of all these years of experiencing life in Morocco, and also witnessing the different migratory dynamics that you can see in that country. When I came to Morocco in the end of the 90s, it was mostly Moroccans trying to migrate to Spain with, crossing the Strait of Gibraltar, because it's only 14 kilometers separating the Moroccan coast from the Spanish coast. So it's actually, it was always a very easy way to cross and then be in Europe. But when I lived in Morocco in the beginning of the 2000s, that changed, and Moroccans were no longer actually crossing, because particularly Spain and Morocco had signed agreements that made it possible to deport irregular Moroccan immigrants back to Morocco. So that stopped, but the movements didn't stop, and was replaced by more and more Sub-Saharan African migrants trying to cross into the EU, because other legal avenues of migrating to the EU became more and more restricted at that time. So I say this just in order to explain, that in my own experience, I just saw that a dynamic started to change. And during that time, people talked about these Sub-Saharan African migrants as transit migrants in Morocco, because everybody was of the opinion that their only goal was to go to Europe. And it's certainly true that many of them had that in mind. But, when I started my PhD, I thought, I'm going to write this about transit migration and what it means to people. And then I just found out that actually this concept, as an analytical concept, was useless for me, at least for the case that I was studying there, because these people were not transiting anywhere. They were stuck. So, and this is when I started to think about, hold on a moment. So if transit is something that we generally understand as something that is transitory, that is, limited in space and time, why do policymakers insist so much on using this term for that type of people who are actually not doing what they say they do? So there's a political agenda behind it, or there's a reason. It is useful as a justifying tool, because if people are apparently transiting, they're a threat, they have to be stopped. So you can kind of justify certain policies. And knowing this then, and I also saw that this was something that was happening all over the place, not only in Morocco, but in many other countries. And actually, I think that is a trend that is still there. It has not changed in policy cycles. The term transit migration is still used in a variety of countries, even though it's not really true, not really clear if these people that are denominated to be transit migrants are actually transiting anywhere, So, and that is one point, but then analytically, if you want to study it, you need concepts that you can, that have some kind of analytical value. And if the thing that you try to describe with that term isn't actually what it seems it is, you need something else for it. And this is why I came up with this idea of, okay, if people are not transiting, what are they? They are stuck, are they immobilized? So they're forcibly immobilized. And that brought me to rethink the whole idea of how migration researchers, or we in general, start to think about migration. We very often think about only one part of migration, which is movement. But it always comes interconnected with settlement or staying. It's part of the same coin. It's just that we often neglect that part when we start to research dynamics of mobility. So I was thinking, okay, let's try and use it as a heuristic device and think about the immobility part of it. What happens if migration control is actually successful? And this is how I came to, think about a forced immobility and what it means.
Yeah, brilliant, of course. And then, like, you also in the book, I really appreciated, understanding how, like, you really spell out how policy really has a real life impact. How, for example, portraying people as transiting migrants, as temporary, has specific implications on their rights. right? And what kind of rights they have while they are in Morocco, and what kind of access they have in services. So like these type of policies reframe reframe the movement and settlement of this of a lot of people.
One more thing, I think exactly what I wanted to do actually was think the question further. Very often we are presented by policymakers with this idea that because certain people move unrestrictedly or uncontrolled, they have to be stopped by migration control. So the idea that there needs to be control, migration control, in order to have some kind of orderly movement, right? So, but I think this kind of thinking stops at the point where one thinks, okay, movement needs to be orderly, otherwise it has to be stopped. But it doesn't answer the question, what happens if movement gets stopped like that? You know, it's not interested in that question. It's just interested what happens to the people in the countries, in the destination countries that are then, you know, do not have to confront the fact that they're newcomers. But it never looks at what actually happens to the people that have been stopped, because it is somehow assumed, well, if they're stopped, they're going to go back to where they came from. You see? And this is, I think, where I wanted to start answering the second question. Well, is this so? You know, what happens to these people who get stopped in their tracks somewhere along the way? And I really think this is still a very valid question for migration researchers and also for policymakers.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. And we see this in many different places across the globe, right? Where people get immobilized and the assumption is, well, okay, they will go back, but they, most people have nowhere to go back to. But this brings me also nicely to my next question, which is around the temporalities, which is the other kind of huge contribution of the book, the temporalities of forced immobility. What I found really, really interesting is that you really, spell out how conditions like uncertainty and precarity, they're not a side effect of these policies, but they are the way that the state and the border violence is inflicted on certain bodies. So in particular, I think you capture really nicely the moment that the adventure, as you call it, the adventure of the beginning of a migratory journey, especially for certain migrants, becomes a nightmare. It's when they're stuck, they're being stuck, when boredom kicks in, when the loss of control over their life is really completely overwhelming. Yes, and when they start feeling that, they live in a reality that, where they don't belong, they have no control over. So, I mean, this is a critical moment and it's really excruciating, right? So I think, I don't know, can you tell us about this temporal violence that, stranded migrants experience every day in these places?
Yeah, I think that the concern with time was one of the most visible aspects that I discovered when I did the research, and I didn't expect that. That people were kind of deprived of the control over their own time because they were constantly waiting for certain decisions to be made by officials, or they were never told when they could, count on a residency permit, or when they, it was a lot of uncertainty on that sense. And I realized that actually, in order to lead a meaningful life, we as humans are generally, migrants or not, always very grateful to have some kind of predictability of the future, you know. I think it is humanly very difficult to live a life where you cannot predict at all what happens in your future, and where you cannot relate your past to your future in some way. And this is a situation that is exacerbated in situations like that in Morocco, when you don't know if you can stay in that country, how are you going to survive, if you can go further or if you can go back. You know, and all the migrants that I was interviewing, actually, they found themselves in that kind of situation. So that's one part. So I think this kind of limbo situation impacts on your own personal way of experiencing your lifetime, and that's it reduces it to some kind of life in the immediate present, and that's very disruptive. But the other thing is that I think this kind of leaving people in uncertainty about what's going to happen is generally a government's tool that has a long tradition, you know, in many countries and in many bureaucracies, and in Morocco as well. You know, there's so in a way, I just thought that it was very successfully applied in migration-related government's mechanisms, because you just let people wait for residencies permit, you let people wait for services or for this instrument in the hope that they will give up and then simply leave. You know, so that kind of Kelsey Norman has called it strategic indifference, you know, that governments choose to being strategically indifferent or not towards certain population groups. And it's very effective if you do that with migrants. And I think that's what the book shows.
Yeah, exactly. Like waiting is an active or making people wait is an active process. It's an exercise of power.
Exactly.
Neutrally. It's not something that it's like the strategic indifference, strategic inaction. It's not forgetting people. It's actively forgetting them, actively abandoning them. Now I think I would like also to discuss a bit the field, discuss about field work, which I can imagine that in a place like Morocco, where, you know, inequalities between the researcher and the participants is really pronounced, is more pronounced than maybe within Europe. So I would like to hear your thoughts about it. How did you address it? I know it's really long time ago somehow, but it is your, you know, kind of drawing on your PhD, which is always, you know, quite, I don't know, emotional, or, you know, we remember these first field works. How did this imbalance of power affect your relationships, the relationships that you built there? Of course, you said that you lived there before, so I guess, you know, there's a more long-term engagement. And then I wonder, is there a way to give back to these communities? How can our research, you know, reach them?
I think it's a very important and very difficult question. In my case, I have to say that some of the people I did research with knew me from before I did my PhD. So they knew me as someone who worked in the social sector, not as a researcher. And they knew me also as, you know, I had been living there for some years. So I think they knew more about me than many research participants usually know about researchers. You know, they knew maybe even more than I wanted them to know about me. They knew my family, they knew my children, they knew my husband, they knew, you know, they knew where they could find me, even if I didn't want it to be found. So in that way, that was I was quite happy about that in a certain way, because I was not able to escape that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it also forced me to give back. There's one example that has stuck with me for quite many years. I had one respondent who was not yet 18 when I interviewed him. And I knew him already before that quite a long time. And he has told me, he came from Congo, and he told me many personal things about his flight, and he fled together with his brother, who was even younger than him. And there were many very traumatic experiences that he has shared with me over the years. And one day we were sitting there, and he was saying, sometimes I wonder why I'm telling you all these things. Why am I do this? Didn't even ask me to, and it just comes out of me, and I don't want to. Sometimes I think, I shouldn't tell you all these things. And I tried then to say to him that, you don't have to, if you don't want and I will don't tell anyone, and I promise. And he said, well, no, it doesn't matter. It's happened now. I've told you. And this is why you now have become my sister. You will stay my sister. You're part of my family now. And he kind of said it in a sense of saying, you're responsible for me now, because I've told you so many things. And in a way, I think that is true. You become responsible, at least for the stories that you have been told as a researcher, and forever, for many years later, even you're responsible of dealing with these stories, and also to use them or not use them in the most ethical and best way. And even though I might not have been able to help physically all these people and support them, but I am at least responsible for the stories, and that as well is something to take seriously, I think. And on another level, I have stayed in contact with many of them until today, and many of them have since moved to other countries, and it has happened that I've helped them when they were when they had problems in other countries, even trying to put them into contact with people I knew in these other countries. Or that has happened, and I do it until even today, with the ones that stayed in contact. But that is not the majority, also because many of them were people who were moving or were intending to move, so the contact has been lost. But I try at least that. I try to be very careful about how I use this information I have been given, and to honor it, I don't know. I wouldn't. I think that is important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. These relationships are very often for life, and you're absolutely right. Like, we're responsible for these stories. One last thing that I would like to talk about is, I heard from a little bird that the book is going to be open access. It is already. It is open access, and that there are some translations coming. So could you tell me about that?
It is open access now, so it can be downloaded for free. I was only able to do this 3 years after it was published, because at the beginning, when it was published, I didn't have the funds to pay for the open access version. But now I had been able to, thanks to the support from the University of Bielefeld library, who have a fund to support young early career researchers. I have been able to pay for it. So I'm very grateful for this, because I always wanted this to be accessible also for researchers from less resourced universities and all over the place. And my big dream would really be to translate that into French. But I'm not sure if I will be able to do this, because I need also some funds for this. And but I'm looking for the possibility. It would be it would be very important to me. I have been living in 2019. I lived in Brazzaville in Congo, and I had contact to sociology researchers, sociology professors and researchers there. And one of the stuff that we always discussed was that they were saying there was so little literature open access and available in French for them, to access, because the university over there was unable to offer support to the researchers. And this is a typical scenario in many African countries. So I would be so grateful if I could achieve this somehow, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Good luck then with that. I thought it was closer, sorry. I think that's great. Thank you so much for, finding the time to talk to me about this. I really enjoyed the book. We have talked about this so many times. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.